Hello and welcome to the 22nd Geopolitical Economy Hour, the show that examines the fast-changing political and geopolitical economy of our times. I'm Radhika Desai.
Michael Hudson.
And working behind the scenes to bring you this show every fortnight are our host, Ben Norton, our videographer, Paul Graham, and our transcriber, Zach Fleischer. We all urge you to click the like button if you like what we are doing, share it on social media, and subscribe to our work by hitting the subscribe button. In our last show, which we entitled The Debt Explosion, How Neoliberalism Fuels the Debt Crisis, we promised that our next show would be about what the solution is. What is the solution to the myriad problems that we were describing? And that is indeed what we are going to discuss today. The solution, we feel, in the United States and in all countries that have gone down the road of neoliberalism and financialization, involves a root and branch reform of the financial system. And this would be the foundation for the urgent economic transformation. It would be the single largest component of the economic transformation that so many of us realize we all so badly need. We must reorient the financial system away from the sort of predatory lending and speculation that we described last time, the sort of predatory lending and speculation on which it has come to rest for the past 5 decades, and increasingly so. So it has been increasing over the last 5 decades. So it has to reorient away from that and towards lending for more sustainable production, pure and simple. And the sustainable production of the goods and services which everyone needs. This involves transforming the very basis of our money and credit system. And given the link between the US financial system and the dollar's world role, it would also involve ending that role and setting up an international monetary system for the world on the basis of cooperation among the different countries of the world. Most Americans, I mean, this may surprise many Americans because they are all invited to feel rather proud of their dollar's world role. However, precisely those who invite American citizens to feel proud of their role are hiding the fact that it is precisely this financial system, or it's precisely this world role and the financial system that underpins it that has undermined the US's productive economy and its capacity to create well-paying, skilled, and meaningful jobs for most people in the United States. Most people in the rest of the world have been asked to regard the dollar's world role as natural and inevitable, but as Michael and I have shown repeatedly in so many shows, it is anything but natural and inevitable. It is indeed instead unstable, volatile, crisis-prone, and profoundly exploitative. The dollar's world role has always rested, as we have argued in our shows and our writings, on an attempted and never successful imperialism, and it has to give way to international cooperation for universal development and planetary sustainability. And the international monetary and financial system that promotes production, sustainability, equality, and a broad-based prosperity, a broad-based well-being, let's say, if not prosperity. The ultimate goal has to be economies in which money plays as small an independent role as possible, where most things are available as entitlements in kind, whether it's food, clothing, housing, education, transport, culture, goods produced publicly and equitably and provided in adequate quantity and quality with a view to sustainability. However, to get there from here, from our very highly financialized economies, transformations are necessary in a number of spheres. So today we want to focus on some of the main elements of this transformation. And one way to summarize what these elements would be is we've tried to divide our conversation into the following topics: who should create money? What should monetary policy aim for? How do we redesign the taxation system? What about land, rent, and so on? Should we nationalize the land and eliminate rent? How should the financial system be regulated? What should replace debt? Obviously, income rather than credit. And finally, how should international money be reorganized? So that's what we want to discuss today. So, Michael, why don't you start us off by just offering some thoughts on what should money creation look like in the different type of economy we're talking about now?
Well, the key word that you used was system, and a system has many dimensions of the solutions. And so all the points that you mentioned are various parts of the overall system that we're trying to put together. There's not one single reform that can cure the problem. And the problem basically is that most money is issued by commercial banks, not by the government. And bank credit, as we've discussed in the last episode, is largely created for the wrong things. It's created against housing to inflate housing prices. It's granted for corporate takeovers. One thing bank credit is not issued for is to build new factories and to employ labor and to increase economic growth. That's the job of the government when the government treasury creates money to spend into the economy for functions that are supposed to serve society and serve economic growth. But when a government lends money, it's for very different reasons. It's for the real economy. And when banks lend money, it's for the financial overhead economy. And that's why we would like to see all money created basically by the Treasury. And of course, if the loans are lent out by commercial banks, if they are the agents of the government, they will get credit and the ability to issue credit from the Treasury, but really not from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was created to get rid of the Treasury in 1913. The Treasury wasn't even allowed on the Federal Reserve. Most people don't realize that before there was a Federal Reserve here, all of the functions that are now done by the Fed were created by the Treasury. And that's the same in most countries. Every country that has a central bank is to essentially take power away from the government to spend money into the economy, to insist that the government should run a budget balance and not create money, and force everybody to depend on bank credit for whatever they need. And the bank credit, as we've described before, is not very helpful. And so money's created by running into debt. If you're for a commercial bank, we want money to created by the Treasury, where it does not involve this kind of debt. There are many ways of doing it. If the commercial banks acted like savings banks, 100% reserved, then they would essentially be reliant on the government to create their credit for the kind of thing that the Treasury creates credit for growth. And so if you look at the solution as what is the problem that you're trying to solve, the problem is to minimize the debt overhead and to maximize economic growth.
Absolutely. And just, you've said so many interesting things, Michael, and you're prompting me to say a few things in this response. So one of the implications of what we're talking about here is that essentially the government would be, because it is the main issuer of money, it would be capable of lending to itself the money that it needs, whether to build roads or schools or hospitals or what have you. And for that matter, engage in all sorts of sustainability initiatives, whether it is protecting forests or transforming the fossil fuel economy into a different type of economy. All of these investments can be made. So that's the first thing. And so the key here in the terms of the creation of money is to take away the power that has been given by governments to the private sector to create money as credit, and essentially create instead money as cash on the part of the government, minimizing the role of credit, and therefore also minimizing the kind of indebtedness that has been so problematic for economies. This would then also lead to the merging of essentially fiscal policy and monetary policy, because in this sense that, today the two are divided, because in order to expand government spending, governments are told that they have to borrow from private creditors. This will no longer be the case. And finally, thirdly, central banks, a lot of people, I mean, I'm against what the Federal Reserve has been doing for a very long time. But having said that, central banks are necessary because there has to be some institution that mediates the relationship between the national currency and the currency of other countries. And so typically, historically, central banks have had three roles. Number one, to maintain the external value of your currency. Number two, to set the interest rates. And number three, to regulate the financial sector. So obviously, the first function is of course important, and the way in which it will be different in the scenario that we are talking about, the kind of anti-financialization scenario, is that the maintenance of the external value of the currency would not just be governed by the need to keep the value of the currency high in order to enable rich people to benefit from it. Sometimes devaluation may be necessary because that is what will be necessary to expand employment, etc. As far as setting interest rate is concerned, the simple fact should be, as the old adage goes, credit should be cheap but not easy. And I think that's the way in which this should be run. And finally, the whole regulation of the financial sector. I mean, this is exactly where the Federal Reserve in particular, and many other central banks that have permitted vast degrees of financialization to occur, have essentially abused their power, because instead of regulating the financial sector in the interest of a productive economy, they have regulated it in such a way as to permit financialization and predatory lending. And this is the whole nature of financial regulation will have to change radically and go back to something like what it was in the aftermath of the Depression era banking legislation that was implemented in the United States.
Well, you pointed to another product of the banks, and that's junk economics, that pretending that the bank credit fuels economic growth and that it does so in a way that promotes stability. But what it really does is finance financial parasitism, a debt overhead. You mentioned cash, and that you want to replace the bank credit with cash. That's what you mean basically is like the paper money in your pocket. The government would spend the equivalent of paper money by any kind of government-created credit through the Treasury or through Treasury banks, or even by commercial banks acting like savings banks with the savings coming from the government. The distinguishing feature of the paper money you have that's in your pockets that's different from bank credit is the paper money doesn't have to be repaid. Nobody is going to somehow repay your currency and say, I'm going to cash it in. You cash in a $10 bill, you get two $5 bills. But bank credit does have to be paid and comes with interest. So the Treasury credit does not have to entail this huge increasing debt overhead that banks create. That's basically it. And it's this debt overhead that actually, as we will discuss a few later, deflates the economy instead of inflates it. Bank credit inflates prices for assets, for houses, for stocks and bonds, but it deflates the economy by making people spend more and more of their income on debt service to buy the higher priced houses or to buy the higher priced retirement income that the banks bid up.
No, and Michael, I think that you're absolutely right that this is exactly what's going on right now. However, in our past programs, one of the things we have emphasized is that historically, this was not the case, even in the United States. In the immediate post-war period, it was a very different type of banking system, which did lend for productive expansion. And it's only really sort of in the 60s, and particularly from the 70s onwards, that the kind of deregulation we have witnessed have converted the bank lending into lending essentially for mortgages and the kind of lending you're talking about. So, and of course, the other thing we've emphasized is that historically in countries like Germany or Japan or China today, the banking system